Here we go. What we're talking about today is a new overall topic, the emergence of Theodore Roosevelt. First subtopic will be the election of 1900. Who's president at this time? William McKinley. And he was easily nominated at the Republican convention in Philadelphia for re-election. Okay? So President McKinley was easily nominated at the Republican convention in Philadelphia for re-election. So Republicans will run President McKinley again for re-election. The big issue for the Republicans is who is going to be his vice presidential running mate. And after the Spanish-American War, Theodore Roosevelt, who was a hero in the war, was actually elected governor of New York after the Spanish-American War. And McKinley wanted him to run with him as his vice presidential candidate in the election of 1900, and Roosevelt was a little reluctant to give up that governorship of New York, which you would have to do to run for vice president. So you can't see if you win and then go back to your old job. If you're going to run for the vice presidency, he would have to resign the governorship, and then if he lost the election, he wouldn't be the governor anymore. Does that make sense? And he was kind of reluctant to do that, but he finally accepted the nomination. So for the Republican Party, it's going to be President McKinley running for re-election for president, and then Theodore Roosevelt will be the vice presidential candidate for the Republicans in 1900. An old familiar name was running for the Democrats again, William Jennings Bryan. I'll put that up just so you can have it. William Jennings Bryan would be running for the presidency for the Democrats. He's run a time before and got worked over. And really, this was an interesting race because Bryan campaigned rigorously across the country. He was everywhere, trying to get people convinced that he should be the candidate for the one that's president. McKinley didn't hardly venture at all from the White House, hardly ever campaigned. He spent most of his time just in the White House being president, so he really didn't do much campaigning. Okay? Now, he had a good first term, didn't he? We got him won a Spanish-American War. We got some good possessions out of that. And so when the smoke cleared, McKinley had 292 electoral votes compared to only 155 for Bryan. So McKinley wins re-election, and he outscored him 51% to 49% in the popular vote. So we won't worry too much about popular vote actually, but anyway, he beat him in the Electoral College and is re-elected president in 1900. Okay, we're going to give you a profile on President McKinley. Kind of an interesting guy. Profile on President McKinley. Okay, he was born in 1843 in Ohio. You notice a lot of presidents are born in Ohio? So William McKinley was born in 1843 in Ohio. And since his great-great-grandfather sailed to America in 1743 from Ireland, he was of what ancestry? Irish. He was Irish. So McKinley was of Irish ancestry. His great-great-grandfather had sailed to America in 1743 from Ireland. So McKinley was Irish. Okay, McKinley grew up in Ohio. He attended both elementary and high school in the state of Ohio, and then enrolled in college. But he didn't stay in college very long. Why? Thinking of the dates a little bit. No?
War.
What war? Civil War. Yeah, very good. He was forced to return home from college because the Civil War broke out, and he was the first one in his hometown to volunteer when Lincoln asked for 75,000 volunteers. William McKinley was the first young man in his hometown to volunteer. So he goes to college. He doesn't stay in college long because of the outbreak of the Civil War. Lincoln asked for 75,000 volunteers, and McKinley is the first one in his hometown to volunteer for service.
So what would happen to his money that he paid for college?
I don't know. I think he would be out of luck probably. Well, he was involved in the Battle of Antietam. Remember that bloody Battle of Antietam? He was there, survived it, and his bravery during the Battle of Antietam earned him the rank of second lieutenant. So that's when he ended the Civil War with that rank. So McKinley fought in the Battle of Antietam. Would you like me to spell that for you? Sure I get it right. He fought in the Battle of Antietam, which was a very bloody battle, survived that, and because of his bravery, he was promoted to second lieutenant, and that is the position he held when he came home after the war. So he did two things when he got back from the Civil War. First thing he did, excuse me, I screwed up a little bit. He actually left the Civil War at the rank of major, not second lieutenant, major. He was promoted to second lieutenant after his bravery at Antietam, but he ended the Civil War with the rank of major. Now when he returned home after the war, he did two things. He got involved in politics and he got married. And the gal he married was Ida Saxton, who's on your ID sheet. Ida Saxton. Married her in 1871. So after he left the Civil War at the rank of major, some things he did is he married Ida Saxton in 1871, and he then entered politics. Anybody want to guess what his first political position was?
Governor?
No, a little higher than governor. A little lower than that. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 1876. So he gets married, he goes into politics, and he's elected to the House of Representatives in 1876. Representing which state? Ohio. Very good. Well, he served, McKinley, Congressman McKinley served in the House until 1891. And how long are congressional terms in the House? 2 years. So he served many different terms in the House. And in 1891, he left the House because he was elected governor of Ohio. Okay, so Congressman McKinley served in the House of Representatives until 1891, served a very, very long time, several terms, and then resigned from the House and ran and was elected to the position of governor of Ohio. Now, who won the election of 1892? Anybody remember? Anybody remember who the winner of that was? He had a grandfather that died shortly after he took office. Well, no? Remember William Henry Harrison died shortly after his inaugural speech because of the rain? He lost him. So McKinley was a serious presidential candidate in 1892, but he lost the presidential nomination to Harrison. Remember? Now Harrison was elected president, you should know this, in 1896, remember? And then he was just re-elected in 1900, we just talked about. So he was elected in 1896, right? And we just spent, our first subtopic was the election of 1900. He was re-elected with Theodore Roosevelt, correct? So he was elected to 2 terms. Well, on September 6th of 1901, McKinley was visiting Buffalo, New York, where he had a speaking engagement. On September 6th, 1901, President McKinley was in Buffalo, New York, at a speaking engagement. And you remember he's president. Well, he gives his speech, got done, was shaking hands with supporters, and he reached out his hand to shake hands with a supposed supporter, and an estranged man shot him. He hid a concealed revolver and a handkerchief in his right hand, and when he went to shake President McKinley's hand, he shot him twice.
Didn't the crowd grab him?
Well, we'll talk about that. So when the president reached out to shake hands with a supposed supporter, an estranged man shot him as he hid a concealed revolver and a handkerchief in his right hand.
Honestly, you would have thought that they would have had some sort of security.
They don't have any. They didn't have any in those days. Okay? He was immediately rushed to a hospital for emergency surgery, and it looked as if he would recover. Okay? So he was shot twice. As soon as he was shot, they rushed him to a nearby hospital for emergency surgery, and it looked like he would recover from his wounds. But unfortunately, he died 8 days later on September 14th, 1901. So it first looked like McKinley would recover from the wounds, but unfortunately he died 8 days later on September 14th, 1901. September 14th, 1901. The president's assassin was Leon F. Czolgosz. Czolgosz, who's on your ID sheet. His assassin, again, was Leon F. Czolgosz, and Czolgosz was later electrocuted for the murder of President McKinley. He was given the death sentence, and he kind of got away from hanging by then, so he was electrocuted in the electric chair, so to speak. Anybody seen The Green Mile? Yeah, that's just exactly what he got. Okay? So, the president's assassin was Leon F. Czolgosz. He was later convicted and electrocuted for the murder of President McKinley.
Is that going to be on a test? Because that's going to be hard to spell.
Well, if you concentrate. Now, who's important at this point? Vice President Theodore Roosevelt. Where was he? He was actually vacationing at the time of the assassination. And by the time he got the news and got to Buffalo, New York, the president had already died. So travel wasn't like you jumped on an airplane in those days. Okay? So Roosevelt was vacationing when he heard of the assassination, and he got back as quick as he could to Buffalo, New York, the site of the assassination. But by the time he had gotten back, President McKinley had already died. So it was in Buffalo, New York, where Theodore Roosevelt took the oath of office and became President of the United States. Okay? So Roosevelt, again, was vacationing at the time of the assassination. When he got word, he came back to Buffalo, but unfortunately got back to Buffalo after the president had died. So in Buffalo, New York, is where Theodore Roosevelt was sworn in and took over the reins as President of the United States. He was and is to this day the youngest man ever to hold the office of President. He was 42 years old. So he's the youngest man ever to be President of the United States. Who was the youngest man ever elected President of the United States? JFK. Okay? So, again, at 42 years old, Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest man ever to hold the office of President of the United States at 42. President McKinley was laid to rest in Canton, Ohio. What else? What other famous things in Canton? Anybody know? Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's on my bucket list. I'm going there pretty quick. Okay, so President McKinley was laid to rest or was buried in Canton, Ohio, which is C-A-N-T-O-N. Canton, Ohio. Now, many Republicans were not very happy about Theodore Roosevelt being president. That basically, as crazy as it sounds, one person once said, many historians have said, that the vice presidency is probably the closest thing you can get in politics to falling off the face of the earth. Okay? The vice president doesn't do much. Really, don't have a lot of power at all. Matter of fact, the Senate Majority Leader and certain senators and members of the House probably have more power sometimes than our vice president. And the idea is the Republicans knew that Roosevelt had some aspirations to be in politics, and they thought the best way to get him into politics and keep him kind of under wraps was to do what? Make him vice president. So there were not a lot of Republicans that were thrilled to death when he assumed the presidency after McKinley's assassination. Matter of fact, one prominent Republican leader was quoted as saying this after he found out. You don't have to write it down. This is what one prominent Republican said after he found the news that McKinley had died and Roosevelt. I'm going to back up. This is what one prominent Republican said during the election of 1900, thinking about the prospects of McKinley being assassinated and Roosevelt taking over. He said, quote, "Don't any of you realize that there is only one life between that madman and the White House?" So when Republicans were strategizing about what's the best way to keep Theodore Roosevelt out of the national politics, well, we'll make him vice president. Well, they didn't understand what would happen if something happened to McKinley, but this guy did, because he made it pretty clear. Don't you guys realize that there's, one step between this madman and him being in the White House? Okay? So we'll give you a profile on President Roosevelt. Tell you a little bit about him. Interesting fellow. Unlike a lot of presidents who were born in Ohio, Theodore Roosevelt was actually born in New York City in 1858. So he was born in New York City in 1858. He was the second of 4 children that were born to Theodore and Martha Roosevelt. So he took his dad's name. Okay? So he was the second of 4 children.
When was he born?
He was born in New York City, 1858, and he was the second of 4 children that were born to Theodore Sr. and Martha Roosevelt. Now, his dad was pretty well-to-do. What does that mean? Rich. He was a glass importer. Okay? He imported glass from overseas and then sold it in the United States and actually made a lot of money. So Roosevelt's family, growing up, he was very well-to-do. Now, when you looked at Theodore Roosevelt as a child, early adolescence, he was known for great energy. He had great curiosity and great determination. The problem was he was a little soft. He had asthma really bad growing up, and he was very, very nearsighted, which resulted in having glasses at a very early age. So he had that look of kind of a wimp, I guess would be the way to look at it. Okay? So although he had a great curiosity, he had a lot of energy, he was very determined in his life, the problem was he suffered greatly from asthma, and he was really narrow vision, narrow-sighted, and had to have glasses at a very early age. And he just kind of looked at the time like, there's the definition of nerd. Okay? Nerd, see him. Okay? So, his father was a little concerned about that, and he always told him, if you're going to need a strong body, if you're going to give you a chance, your mind a chance to develop, you can't be all here. You've got to have a strong body, that'll help your mind develop. Well, when he's 13 years old, some boys in the neighborhood, 2 of them, picked on him and tormented him, and Theodore never really could fight back, and he was very ashamed by that, and it bothered his father. Okay? So he was picked on as a youth, especially when he was 13. 2 boys really were just brutal to him. We'd call that bullying today. And he was so weak, he could not defend himself or fight back, and he was very ashamed by that. So his father at that point said, you know, we're going to have to do something. Get this kid physically strong as well as mentally strong. So actually he built a gymnasium in his home for him. So his father built him a gymnasium in the family home, and he started working out so that he could build strength, which not only would help him defend himself against bullies of the time, but also his father believed strongly if he would get himself in good physical condition, it would help his mind expand. So his father, after seeing him picked on, especially after these 2 boys tormented him, and how ashamed Theodore Roosevelt was that he couldn't fight back, the dad built him a gym. And he actually overcame his asthma and built up quite unusual physical strength, became a very strong individual. So he got himself lined out physically as well. His asthma got under control and actually overcame that, and he built up an unusual physical strength. He was short and stocky, very tough, but he wasn't as a child before his dad fixed him up with the gymnasium. Well, he was very bright because after his high school years, guess what university he enrolled at? Harvard. That's close, Harvard. He was only 18 years old, and in 1876, after graduating from high school, Theodore Roosevelt attended Harvard University. Okay, just 18 years old when he went. So he was very bright. While he was in college at Harvard, he met a very nice young lady by the name of Alice Lee, who is on your ID sheet. And she was a daughter of a very wealthy Boston investment firm. So they had some money in this family. Not only was he fairly wealthy, he married wealthy as well. So while he was at Harvard, he met Alice Lee, who was the daughter of a very wealthy Boston investment firm.
He married her or he
Well, he met her. But he's going to, 1 year later, on his 22nd birthday, marry her. Okay, so he met her while he was at Harvard. They dated, and about a year later, on Theodore's 22nd birthday, the couple married. So he graduates from Harvard in 1880, and he really isn't sure what he wants to do with his life. He's got a Harvard education, but he's not sure what he wants to do. So what do most people that graduate from Harvard, what do a lot of them go do? They go be lawyers. So he then enrolled at Columbia University Law School. But the courses there didn't interest him, and finally he just decided to drop out of law school and enter politics. Okay? So he graduates from Harvard. He's not really sure what he wants to be. He goes kind of the normal route of a lot of Harvard graduates, and he enrolls at Columbia University Law School. He really doesn't like the courses there, doesn't really want to be a lawyer, so he leaves Columbia Law School and decides to enter politics. Okay, and he joins the Republican Party after he leaves law school. Joins the Republican Party. Well, in the fall of 1881, he's just 23 years old. He wins election to the New York State Assembly. What would that be like? Who do we have locally here that's in the Wyoming State Assembly?
Mayor.
No?
Governor.
No, you're a state legislator, state senator. Who's a state senator from Oregon that's in the legislature? Mike Greer. Mike Greer, same thing as Mike Greer. So what he did is in the fall of 1881, he was just 23 years old, he runs for the state assembly, and he's elected a state senator, which is different than a national senator, for the state of New York. So similar to what Mike Greer is in the state of Wyoming. You go to the legislature and make laws.